Welcome to the Recover You podcast with Kylene and Patrick Terhune. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome everyone to another episode of Recover You. I'm so excited to have Charles Roberts on this episode. Charles is a licensed professional counselor in Louisiana, a licensed professional clinical counselor with supervisor designation in Ohio. He is a developmental and relational trauma therapist, a certified experiential therapist, and he has extensive training in EMDR and psychodrama and is certified in brain spotting. Charles completed his training for sex addiction therapy from the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals. He is the owner of the Welcoming Place Counseling and Coaching LLC. And in addition to running a successful private practice, Charles contracts with on-site workshops based in Tennessee, leading 3 group intensives, Healthy Love and Relationships, Healing Trauma, and Living Centered, as well as being a TaraHope recovery coach. So we are so excited to have you on the podcast today.
I'm really excited to be here. And I will make one correction in the bio because I have not updated it. And that is that I'm no longer licensed in Louisiana.
Oh,
okay. Since moving to Ohio, I just let that one go and I'm just licensed here.
Sorry, Louisiana.
That's all right.
Their loss for sure. Well, we are so excited to have you on the podcast. Many people in our immediate circle are going to recognize the fact that you were Patrick's therapist through recovery, and we just so appreciate you. And we also want to put a little caveat in here just for anybody listening to recognize that we have had this conversation before this episode is recorded, that we all give full permission to talk about our personal story and Patrick's sessions if that comes up. So if anything is said, it is done with full permission. This is not something that Charles takes lightly when it comes to sharing details of his client sessions or anything like that. He's very careful about privacy. So we just want to make sure that if you're listening and you hear anything that kind of raises a red flag, he has full permission from us to share anything about our story and any of the experiences that we've had together. So we want to just make sure that's very clear. We're so excited to have you on today because one of the things that really stood out in all of our interactions with you was what a compassionate therapist you are, and just what a compassionate person you are, and how you show up and use the compassionate model in all of your interactions. And Patrick would always come back from his sessions and share kind of what happened and what you guys talked about. And every single time, it was so impactful and helpful. And, of course, he would go and share when we were struggling with something, and all of the advice that you would give to him that he would then give to me. I also very much appreciated. And so we just really want to thank you publicly, first of all.
Absolutely.
But, you've made a huge impact on our lives. But the thing that we really noticed, we have just really the thing that has been really primary from you is the empathy and compassion. And so I'm just curious, how much of that is just who you are? How much of that has been learned from life, or even, come from your training or experience?
Mm-hmm. I love that question. There's multifaceted answer here. One is that I do believe that I was born a sensitive human being, right? So I'm pretty sure came into the world pretty sensitive, and with that have a whole lot of trauma that I absorbed in my early years, my developmental years, and so being a sensitive boy and in a very traumatic place made me very aware, very hypervigilant. I'd also developed into a caretaker, care for everyone else's needs. And so, so I came into this field midway in my life, actually in my 30s, with a lot of trauma history and a lot of therapy. I had some really great therapists, really great, compassionate therapists. I had a few that were not so much. I won't get into those stories, but you learn from good examples and bad examples. And then I would say that my schooling, my education was definitely steeped in compassion. We learned a lot about Carl Rogers, right? Dr. Carl Rogers, and he talks a lot about unconditional positive regard and the importance of the therapeutic alliance, right? That you can be the most brilliant therapist out there and do the most evidence-based practice, but if you don't have a solid therapeutic alliance, then it'll all fall flat. And he really believed that. And I did too. And I was drawn to that. I don't know really why I was drawn to that. The other thing I would say is that one of my favorite names for God is Emmanuel. So I just love that name, God with us. And I think there's a lot of people out there who would believe, think of God as more as the judge or the one who condemns us and all. But I just like to think of God as just someone who really wants to be with us. And the best definition I heard in my life for joy was being with someone who wants to be with you. Right? It's really resonated with me. So I think all of those things together just pointed me in a direction, and I was drawn to reading like the work of Sherry Geller up in Canada on therapeutic presence. She's written some great books on that. So everything my training and understanding has led me there. And I have to say also, I don't frankly understand anybody who would work in this space without compassion. I actually don't know how you would do it without being completely burned out.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned something towards the beginning, saying, you learn from the good and bad examples. Mm-hmm. And there's so much in my life that I feel like when people have been a good friend to me, that has then taught me how to be a good friend to other people. Mm-hmm. And so that is so true, I think, and so helpful when we can kind of say, how does it feel when somebody talks to me this way? Or how does it feel when this happens? And then either not repeating it or passing it along when it is beneficial. Mm-hmm. And so, did you have any questions there?
No questions. I can attest to the way you are. The one story that I will tell people, and I always remember this, is during our full therapeutic disclosure. You walk into that, it's something you have to do. You're full of shame. You think you're the worst person in the world, and you're about ready to read in graphic detail all the shameful things that you wanted to take to your grave. And so, that in that moment, you're almost at your most vulnerable. I don't know if there's any other moment that's more vulnerable than that, but that's pretty vulnerable. And I'll never forget that, you sat very close to me. I'll be honest, like initially I was like, why is he sitting so close to me? But you sat very close to me, and because you knew how hard it was, and you immediately put your hand on my back, and like just describing that story, just knowing as I was talking through this multi-page document full of hard things and full of shameful things, I could feel the love, I could feel the compassion, and it's still, just recounting the story gives me chills, just thinking about it, because it was that moment, that hey, no matter what happened, and no matter what happened between Kylene and I, which I'm sure you've seen it actually went well for us, but I'm sure they don't always go well, but I just I can attest personally to the amount of compassion and empathy that you show in, through that one example.
Well, I would say the impact that it made.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
I will say with that, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. I will say with that, this is why I insist, and some people don't, right, that when we're doing a formal disclosure, there are two therapists there, because being one of the most difficult things that the addict has to do, and one of the most difficult things that the betrayed spouse has to hear, like, you need two therapists who are fully focused on their clients, like super important for that. Because you're right, it's one of the heaviest kind of sessions I ever sit in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm mindful too, I was thinking before this interview about Patrick Carnes's belief about the four core beliefs of the addict, and this will shed a little bit more light on why I come at it from compassion. I wrote them down so I get them right here. He said the core beliefs are: I'm basically a bad, unworthy person. No one would love me as I am. My needs are never going to be met if I have to depend on others. And sex is my most important need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they all flow out of that. I'm basically a bad and unworthy person.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I don't see humans that way, but I completely understand humans seeing themselves that way. When they come in.
That's how you feel walking into, that's how you feel upon discovery or whatever. And then that's how you feel walking into the disclosure as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and not to turn this into a theology podcast too, but I, just as a recovering ex-evangelical fundamentalist, I will say that a lot of the way that religion is communicated teaches that first point, that you're fundamentally bad, and I've really shifted my thinking in recent years to think, no, God created you good. Mm-hmm. He created you good, and there is sin in the world, and that this evil comes from that. It's not that you were created bad, and so that I think that is a belief that tiny little shift can make a huge impact in how we see ourselves, our willingness to forgive ourselves, how we view other people, and how we treat other people, and just how we interact in the world in general. Mm-hmm. You work both with the addicted and also heavily with betrayed spouses as well. What do you think are, the hallmarks of healing or living a recovered life? Are they the same in both? Are they a little bit different? What does that look like?
Oh, gosh, what a good question. Well, I want to start by saying one thing I never do is see the addict and the recovering spouse. I don't see both of them, because I find it really, and I'm actually never tried. I can't even imagine, right, giving my full self, my full compassionate self to one and then having to do the other, because I don't know how people do it. Some people may do that. So, because I want to show up with all my compassion, all my love for one. And what that does not mean is that I don't have some empathy for the other when I'm working. Right. So I work from the same mindset. And I do think there are some similarities in working with both. Let me see if I can identify what those are. So I a lot of times will quote, I know Pat has heard this quote by Johann Hari, right? That the opposite of addiction is, what is it? Let me see. How does it go? Pat, do you remember?
Connection.
Yeah, that's right. That one. Yeah. The opposite of addiction.
You got it.
It's not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection, right? So, So I do believe in both instances, working with the addict or the betrayed partner, that we start from that framework, that for sure addiction is a breakdown in connection. I think of it as a dissociative phenomenon, if you will, a total disconnection from self, from core emotions, and from our relationships, right? Because how can you be totally connected in a partnership if you're having to orphan off parts of yourself through addiction, right? So with that regard, the way I would approach treatment for the addict is let's talk about what it would be like to reconnect with the truth of who you are, the truth and goodness of who you are, and that'll expose the things that you're not, right? So we do that through mindfulness, right? Connection to the body, slowly connecting. Pat, you remember that process of reconnecting to your emotions. Yeah. I'll tell this brief story.
It was a success, by the way. He's very connected to his emotions now.
I know. I love it. I love that.
I might start crying right now.
Okay. Then I'm going to tell this story about you, but I'll be very vague here. I just remember you saying something to the effect of, I just can't stop crying. What's wrong with me or something? and I think I may have left or something in my chair, like, that's amazing. This is so good.
Yeah,
Like, you're becoming more fully human. You're becoming more fully yourself. You have access to the full range of emotions. This is beautiful, beautiful trauma and addiction work right here. Because trauma and addiction are very similar. They rob us of our ability to connect to self and others. And that's where I come in with working with betrayed spouses, right? They're experiencing all of this post-traumatic stress. And by the way, huge post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms from the betrayal alone. Add to that what happens, and I see this recently working with some natural disaster victims, that when something that earth-shattering happens, not only are you now dealing with that trauma, but even attachment wounds and other issues from long ago come up and mingle with it. So people tend to think we're just dealing with betrayal trauma. We're just not. It's very rare to just be dealing with that. You get all these things that, were either kind of resolved or kind of tucked away. Now they're all coming to the surface, like running a motorboat across a still pond. All the stuff's coming up from the bottom, right?
That was 100% my experience. I described it as trauma debris. Mm-hmm. Because it was, as soon as this happened, all of these other things started floating around. It was almost like they got mixed up, and it was really like disconcerting for a little while because, there was almost a phase where I was mixing up what was happening in my current relationship with my ex and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, whoa, I don't want to mix these things up, But mm-hmm. Any fear, any insecurity, any limiting belief I had just, highlighted exponentially when this happened.
I recall, and it took a while to get there because everything that happened with Kylene, probably in the first 2 years, I always thought it was my fault. Like, she had a cold, my fault, ankle hurt, my fault, and all these different things. And it was fairly recent, like in the last, let's say, year. I remember she had, kind of an emotional moment, was sad about something. And I remember she even said to me, "This is not you." She actually said, "This is not you." And it was like, it was a victory. I was like, hey. so yeah, it was, but certainly you go, well, is there more to that because of what happened? So to your point on trauma debris and
oh, yeah. Well, and I think one other thing I want to say about that, in terms of, we're treating a system here. Okay. So a family is coming into my office, either way, when I'm getting the partner or the addict. This whole system's also coming into my office, and I want to always keep that in mind. And one way I keep that in mind, especially when working with addicts, is I just constantly have to gently remind them, this is about you and this isn't about you. Like, your partner is having, probably feels like they're losing their mind, right? Just like every little thing can be a trigger, right?
Right.
That's not about you, and it is about you, right? Mm-hmm. So the best thing, and I'm forgetting the book it's in now. I get these jumbled up, but you'll probably remember the book where the author talks about always being present to validate the emotions that come up in your partner. Yeah, from that book. That's it. Yeah. And there's other steps too, but validate and reassurance, I'm sure, are two of the 3 or 4 things that they list. And here's what you don't do. Don't get super irritated by it.
Right.
Be gentle. I mean, of course, say, I need a minute. Let me take a break, whatever you need to do to feel safe. But you're going to have to just be really patient, because you're going to be the bad person for a long time. You have to be patient with that. That's trauma-informed situation right there.
Oh, so true. So true. What do you see as like the pillars of, or the green flags of recovery in both sides?
Oh, that's good. So I'll tell you, actually, in a lot of ways, the two of you are just, I don't know, you've just done some things really beautifully in your journey. So in giving these examples, actually think of you too very often. Okay. When I'm talking to clients, I'm like, I want to say, just be more like Pat and Kylene, just do what they did because you guys do some things really beautifully. I think early on to establish a way of checking in with each other is just super important. So we learn Thanos, and I try to encourage couples to lean into that. I always encourage addicts to sort of lead that process, just because it feels right to do that. Also, I don't think that this recovery journey is possible without an army of support. I have had some people try to do this thing alone, and I get it because of all the shame. You don't want to let people in. But having a support group, a 12-step group, a church group, some kind of people who you can be with and you can share all the dirty, awful stuff that you're going through, and you won't be judged. But you'll hear maybe like, me too, or I get it. Like, that is essential. What was the other thing I was going to mention with that? I generally encourage, and I feel terrible encouraging this. I'm not a huge journaler. I journal sporadically and spontaneously, but I do think that journaling is a really powerful tool. And the people that I see who journal on a regular basis are the ones that tend to do better. Because really, if we think about that reconnection with self and others, that's a beautiful way to reconnect. What am I feeling? What's going on in my body right now? Mm-hmm. What are my thoughts? What are my emotions? Just to be able to name those things is really, really essential part of that. And then I think the other part that is often neglected is doing good trauma work. Mm-hmm. My favorite tool with that is brain spotting, but sometimes I'll do some EMDR as well, and there are other modalities. But having the space for both addict and partner to be able to tell your whole story, mm-hmm. and then to do the trauma work where it needs to happen. One thing I wanted to share with that, I just started reading a new book, and I like to read books when they validate things I've been doing without without thinking about it. So it's this book by Darren Ford, who's a wonderful CSAT, called "Awakening from the Sexually Addicted Mind: A Guide to Compassionate Recovery." Isn't that nice? So he's a mindfulness-based therapist, but he put this quote in here. And I just want to read it actually to you. I might read a couple things, but he says, even if you, as a child, actively looked for sex, which he says kids don't do, it is up to adults around you to explain and educate you about engaging in the behavior in a safe and healthy way. Your brain was not fully developed yet. In fact, our prefrontal cortex does not fully develop till about age 25. So there's no way you can be fully aware of the impact of your choices you are making. When I get an addict in my office who says, I had a perfect childhood, like I have no trauma, I don't even know why people connect trauma to addiction, which I hear a lot, I will generally say, and it's almost always true, I'll say, what age were you exposed to pornography? Mm. And the age just keeps going down and down and down. Right now, I think it's 10? I don't know, somewhere in that range. Sometimes it's earlier, 8, 9, 10. And with high-speed internet, kids aren't starting with pictures anymore. They're starting with videos. Imagine the impact of a little child watching rape, mm-hmm. and has nobody to help interpret what he or she is seeing. Yeah. That's trauma. Mm-hmm. Significant trauma. Right. If you don't have any other trauma in your life, early exposure to pornography is an assault to your humanity.
I'm so glad you said that. So true. Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you brought up the idea of trauma work and specifically talked about that. I heard someone describe it recently as there's a huge difference, and this kind of goes into what you were just speaking into. There's a huge difference from experiencing something as a child and having no explanation for it, mm-hmm. and then experiencing something and having an adult explain it or make it, like, put it into context or make it make sense to you. And the safety in one and the ability to process is very, very different when you have that adult presence, being able to communicate and explain and protect and guide. And when you are left with a tiny little child brain trying to process something that you don't understand, it's so hard. And your brain does the best it can with the information that it has, which is not much at 5, at 6, at 8.
Yeah.
And what's weird, just speaking from my own experience, is like the older you get and the more information you gather, it keeps trying to process and put the pieces together. But by the time you become an adult, then you have all of these weird connections that, have created fears or insecurities or, whatever in your brain. And it was just trying to protect you the whole time, but that's the way it did it.
That is so true. I think others have said it better, but some of the worst and most intense trauma, and I don't like comparing trauma to trauma, but some of the worst that I see in my office is trauma of neglect.
Yep.
What didn't you get? And if you didn't, which most of us didn't, get a good education about your sexuality and what's happening in your body and what you're going to be exposed to, and, protecting, kids from seeing those things the best we can, that's profound neglect. Profound neglect. And then I don't know if it's okay to cuss, so I'll try to say this without.
We have it listed as explicit, so.
Okay. So a wise person said, I wish I remember who said this, but in the absence of information, our brains make up all kind of shit. Right. And so think about all the absences of information we received or didn't receive as kids. We carry that through as trauma, and particularly because little kid brains need to protect the adults, because if the adults are wrong, we're screwed. Yeah. Right. So the way you protect the adults is you think, oh, this thing happened. I feel really bad in my body. I feel a lot of shame. Must be because there's something wrong with me, because there can't be something wrong with mom or dad.
I think one of the most powerful things that you did for me is I was exposed at a young age too, much like a lot of guys. But you actually reversed and I don't know the therapeutic method that you did, but you created a scenario in my mind through talk therapy where I rescued me. Mm-hmm. I, as an adult, came into that situation and rescued me, and that was and you can probably describe what
inner child work.
Yeah, but that was amazing. So if you turn that on its head, what you just talked about. So now you're saving yourself in a noble and way full of integrity. And it was a really powerful exercise for me to go through that.
I love it. I love that. Thank you for reminding me of that beautiful scene. I remember it. Yeah. I love doing inner child work. That's just a form of parts work, right? So parts work and internal family systems and all, ego state therapy, all those things are really big right now. They've been around for a long time, but inner child work has really been around for a while. And what a beautiful thing to realize that even though you're, 45 years old, however old you are, that your little boy part or little girl part is still right there. We're just like trees, all the parts of us are still present. And so when we're feeling scared or scared especially, we can put a hand on our belly, put a hand on our heart, and just say, oh, what's up? I'm right here with you. I'm here to take care of you. And I know you're scared. And it's going to be okay, because you don't have to do this now. I'm going to do it for you.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a really functional way to reparent yourself in a healthy way that maybe didn't happen. And also, I think, just for everyone who may be listening going, oh, my parents did the best that they could. Absolutely. And we really like the idea of both, and that, many of us have parents that absolutely did their best with the information they had, and they made mistakes, and it hurt us in some way. The same as like Patrick and I tried really hard to be good parents, and we 100% made mistakes, and we recognize that. And so I think both can be true, right? Like you can have parents that tried, that did their best to be present, that loved you and never ever talked to you about that. or your parents have their own issues and maybe their own pornography issues, and maybe they were your accidental exposure because you found something in the house, right? And so many different ways that can be true in both scenarios. And yeah, I love, parts work is so awesome, and there's so much validity and help, I think, to that in so many different ways. And Patrick's gonna laugh because I did some parts work recently, and one of my parts was like a little monster, and I literally, so sometimes you can in different exercises that you do working through your emotions and trauma and whatnot, sometimes you can have little external things that you pull in to remind yourself of the internal work that you did. And so I went on Amazon and I got this little pink monster stuffed animal thing. And because my monster had been gray, and then when we did this work, it turned pink, and so I got this thing. I literally sleep with it. And every night Patrick is like, it's you and your little pink monster. But it's my visual reminder of, these things that I'm learning, it's really okay to show up and be myself, and, all of these things that we're working on, and, through exercises like that, through parts work, and so like that. So it's really cool.
It is really cool. I've started using, I don't know who, I think I came up with this on my own. If I'm stealing it, I'm sorry. But I think about a school bus, a lot of us rode the school bus growing up. And, I think of all our parts being back there on the school bus, but I want to be driving this bus. Okay. So when they come up and like, I want to drive the bus, we got to pull the bus over, right? I had a bus driver who would do that. She'd pull over the bus. She'd be like, we're not doing this. Sit down, and so developing that good relationship. So I love that you have that kind of relationship. I think I remember this too when we were working together, that I said, I think, and this could be with someone else, but you were like, how do we get rid of this addict part? Like, I just need to kick him off the bus. Right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I think I remember looking at you and saying, we don't.
Yeah.
Get rid of that part.
I think your
I remember that.
Your exact words were, it was what we were working through was actually a table, and he had a seat at the table. The addict had a seat at the table, and he didn't have an oversized voice, right? It wasn't but the addict was a role. It was a part, and you could say he had an outsized role in my life for a while, and he was there for a reason, but now he can step back and right.
Yeah, if you're not being if you're not being a recovering board chairman, then that will start making some noise.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I think what you guys just said is really important, just for the people that are listening. So Patrick goes, okay, I want to get rid of this addict part. I don't like this part of me. All of our parts are there for our benefit. They're serving something good in the system. And they may show up in ways that we don't like anxiety or depression or addiction or things like that, but they're there for a reason. And if we try to ignore them, that's not going to ultimately heal. But what parts work is so interesting because it validates the part, but not in an unhealthy way.
Right.
So it's not saying that the way that part is acting out is acceptable, but it's asking, why are you here? And what are you trying to communicate? What need are you trying to fulfill? Because when you can, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I find in addiction recovery that's a crucial part of recovery, is to find out why that part is there, because then you can answer that need in a healthy way, as opposed to sort of subconsciously acting out that need in an unhealthy way.
You got it. It's really, I think, the difference between white knuckling and recovery. Right. So white knuckling is to deny there's a thing and just focus in on stopping a behavior without, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, over there. That's white knuckling. That does not end well. Right. Recovery is when you bring that addict into the room and you sit down and you say, what's going on? Right. Just like you just described, you can't run my life, but I need to understand why you came about. What's your purpose? I know you're here to care for me. I know that's why you're here. Yeah. And I want to show you that I no longer need you.
Right.
I want you to watch. Here's how I'm going to demonstrate that.
Mm.
Why do you think trauma work is important for a betrayed spouse? And do you think it's harder for a betrayed spouse or an addicted to notice that trauma is part of recovery? I guess that's a two-part question, but
It is, and I'll answer it in two ways. I can't tell you, I think it's the rule, not the exception, how many times I hear partners say, either through their spouse or to me directly, like, he's the person that needs help. Like, I didn't do anything wrong. Why do I have to go to therapy? And what I just saw, and by the way, I totally get that. I think people can feel like that's a punishment, but I just often just say, oh no, you don't have to go to therapy. Like, you deserve to go to therapy. Like, you deserve to. This is why I look at it. Like, you've been significantly wounded, right? And so absolutely you deserve care, right? And then to educate a little bit about, okay, this I'm just using an example, this impulse you have to just like look through his phone all the times, or to check the phone records, or to do all this. Super normal, by the way, very normal. It's called hypervigilance.
Right.
It's called the brain saying, I need to know I'm safe and I'm going to continue to be safe. So I need to know all the things. Mm-hmm. That's hypervigilance. So I just try to educate, I go through the post-traumatic stress criteria, and I just say, look, this is what's happening, and you deserve to heal from that. And healing doesn't mean you become somehow unaware or somehow naive or anything. In fact, it makes you more present so that you can trust your gut even more, right? Without all these other things going on where you feel like you're losing your mind. So you get your whole self back through trauma work. That's the way I usually frame it, and that usually sells pretty well, right? So
I would even say, I like to even say, instead of getting your whole self back, even that because it's like a lot of times I'll hear like, oh, I just want to be the person that I was, and I don't really think that's possible. It's like when you're willing to do the work, you get the 2.0 version that I think that's better.
Oh, I'm going to use that. That's some good language. I think it's a way harder sell for the addicted person. Because again, we've got that foremost. I mean, there are occasions when I get someone who's completely disconnected from the shame, but when someone's really connected to the shame and they're really in that state of, something's got to change here. I can't do this. That's a really good place to be, first of all. But oftentimes it's a hard sell for the addict to get them to believe that they too deserve to heal from the wounds that are that addiction, right? They often will say, I just want to stop hurting myself and hurting people. Can you just make that? Yeah. Versus, getting them to see that, and the compassionate lens, which I admit is really hard for a lot of my addict clients to take on, is that no, like, that addiction didn't just spring up out of nowhere. Like, it's got, I use the tree, right? We can pluck off that rotten fruit on this tree all we want, but if we don't look at that root system, it's going to keep producing bad fruit.
Right.
So, get really that working on, like, you deserve, and all those that you love deserve for you to heal.
I think it was a number of years. I think it was, I knew that one of my traumas was some infidelity in earlier relationships, but it took me a long time to kind of basically say, hey, I was betrayed too. And that was
super recently.
Yeah, super recent. Even though in my mind, logically, I recognize it, but I think it was exactly what you were saying. Is it took me a while to kind of make that connection and have compassion on myself for that, for that piece that had happened in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Maya Angelou stated, I have found that among its other benefits, giving liberates the soul of the giver. TaraHope is a nonprofit that is on a mission to support women experiencing and recovering from sexual betrayal trauma. We do this by providing education and resources, as well as connecting them with and paying for practitioners who guide and assist them through the recovery process so that they can lead happy and fulfilling lives again. If you are interested in supporting this nonprofit organization, here are a few ways to consider doing this. Number 1, pray that we connect with the women who need us most. Pray for all the women who are granted scholarships that they find true healing. Pray for our coaches that they have wisdom in every session. Please pray for me as I continue to lead in an area that is unfamiliar territory and, to be honest, kind of intimidates me. Pray for the right people to be led to TaraHope so that we can connect and grow into an organization that has an impact across the country. This includes bringing on a CEO, marketing specialist, fundraising specialist, and social media manager, to name a few of the people we would love to have in our team moving forward. 2, please consider sharing this podcast with pastors, churches, friends you know who might be interested, therapists or counselors who have a heart to help others, or even sharing a screenshot or audio clip on social media. Anyone you think that might be interested in learning that this organization exists. Number 3, please consider donating. One 6-month scholarship ranges from $3,000 to $3,600, and $150 would cover one session with a TaraHope coach. Number 4, and finally, if you are someone who is feeling called to help us grow, please reach out to us to let us know in what way you might want to participate. I mentioned earlier a few areas we need support: someone who has experience running nonprofits, someone interested in running social media, someone good at marketing, etc. Honestly, whether you donate $5, cover us in prayer, or share this podcast with one person, we are so thankful for your participation. The smallest action of support can have a huge ripple effect, so never think that any contribution is too small. We are so thankful for each of you listening. To donate, please go to tarahopealliance.org/donate. If you'd like to reach out to us, please email info@tarahopealliance.org.
Okay, so one thing I would love to kind of have you speak into, we've talked a little bit about it, I think, in the conversation in some aspects, but this idea that, and I think this applies on both addiction and betrayal recovery because it's just speaking into the trauma work aspect of it. Can you maybe talk into the idea that we can't just logically work ourselves through this? And I think that's why these other modalities are so important. Things like EMDR, things like brain spotting, things like visualizations and inner child work and stuff like that, because it actually works on the subconscious level and really helps us process things in a way that our logical brain just, I feel like it's impossible to fully move through some of these painful things if we just try to think it through. I feel like if we could just think through it, we would all be healed.
Okay, let me do the best I can. Okay, so let me just say I am not a neuropsychologist. Okay, we're learning new things every single day in this field, and it's super exciting, and I just can't keep up. But what I do know is, right, this is not just a case of I'm just deciding to wake up and do bad things, or I'm just deciding to be anxious all the time about my partner's whereabouts. This is not about that. Because you're right. If we could, who would decide that? Like, who would decide that? Nobody, right? It's not a matter of choice, or we would choose something different. We kind of know that anecdotally. But what we know on the neuroscience level, right, is all that trauma is in the subcortical brain, right? So from the the limbic system, even down into the showing you like your listeners can see, but even down into the brain stem, right? It really connects to the deepest levels of trauma. And so just as Bessel van der Kolk said, and Body Keeps the Score, that book that's ahead of its time, good trauma work is not top down. In other words, it's not from the neocortex or the prefrontal cortex down to the brainstem, but it's bottom up, right? So we got to find ways, interventions that allow clients to get into that deeper level. So EMDR, brain spotting, other somatic kind of work will allow the client to sort of drop into those deeper levels. And the cool thing is when we drop into that, healing happens really rapidly as well. When we try to work on trauma as if it's sort of up here in the front part of our brain, this, let's talk through it. If anything, it just re-traumatizes people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to verbalize and run over details over and over and over and over and over. That can be painful. It can be hard. It can dig in those neural circuits and make them deeper. And I mean, Patrick has experienced that with the brain spotting. I've experienced it with the subconscious reprogramming, the stuff that I've done and the stuff that I do with my clients. And sometimes it's just like, often there are multiple layers, but then sometimes you'll hit this one that's so specific and it just heals so quickly. And it's literally life-changing, something that's impacting you, a negative belief about yourself, or some of those beliefs that you listed out earlier, and you start to process those things and those fears and those insecurities, and you literally show up differently in the world the next day.
Yeah.
And you begin to have that view that, no, I am good. I am worthy of love. It is okay for me to use my voice and to show up in the world and to contribute, and I'm valuable and worthy of doing that. It's okay for me to set boundaries, right? Like all of these things that are part of recovery. And so I think that work is so helpful and so amazing, and such a critical part of the healing process. And so I just think it's awesome. There's so many different angles that can do that now, and that it is becoming more talked about and more popular and more utilized because it's just so impactful.
That's right. Yeah. We're literally just healing our nervous systems, right? Just expanding the number of tolerance. And I will say along with that too, that being a human is super hard these days. All you have to do is turn on the radio and you experience. I think it's also normal to suffer and normal to feel anxious and stressed and all these things. The lie of addiction is that those things aren't okay. So let me seek out this life that's free from all these highs and lows, rather than just expanding our capacity to live in this traumatic space called Earth, right?
That's such a good point. It's just increasing our resiliency, basically. That's so valid, especially when you're talking about trauma, because in my experience, when you're moving through or when you're going through the trauma itself, your resiliency is like 0, right? And so part of recovery then is building that resiliency back up so that you can navigate, because triggers will happen. That's part of life. And someone will hurt your feelings, and you'll make mistakes, and there's no way to be a good enough person that nothing bad ever happens.
That's right. Yeah.
And so being able to have that resiliency and that tolerance and that flexibility again in life, I think that's a really great point, that is a huge piece of what it means to live in recovery. Absolutely.
I think it's just listening to the two of you talk, I was thinking about this, as I've gone through my own recovery journey over the last 2+ years. And I have the good fortune to have a job where I get to lead a lot of people. And I know that my own, my recovery work, especially terminology and actions, has made its way into leadership. And so I know one of the things I'm more in tune to is I allow people to express themselves in a particular way, in a particular setting. There's always a line, right, that you could go over, but I think sometimes when I pull people in after they've been emotional about something, they think I'm going to chew them out, and I never chew them out. I always say, I think the question I always lead with now, I didn't before, is, what are you afraid of? Let's talk about what you're afraid of. And I think sometimes that floors people. They don't know what to think, but then as we work through it, we kind of do get to the root of it, and then we're able to kind of resolve that and then move forward. And I don't think I would have ever done that, in 2020. Yeah, 2020. And I've been leading organizations for a long time. And so it's nice to be able to kind of, I think it's, as you recover and you become a healthy person, it's not just about not doing the addictive behavior anymore. You do show up in a different way. And that's just one example of how I think I've,
I will second that he's the best non-therapist therapist that he does it to me all the time. I mean, he picks up on exactly how to use the language to communicate, to help you think through things. And it really is good. I'm quite impressed a lot of times. I'm like, oh, you use that language stuff better than I do. And you do,
I learned it from you and you, Charles. You both have been great.
It's so interesting because it's like, just to interact with that, and just how much he absorbs it and then immediately implements. Right. And so he has really learned how to use it, how to interact with other human beings, and how to communicate on a different level. And I think that's been a huge, I think you've always been a compassionate leader, but I think this has really transformed communication and the depth to which you connect to people and interact with them, for sure.
And we were talking about empathy and compassion. You really feel for people more and more too as you heal. You just really feel that, when somebody comes to you and says, oh, my wife is really sick, we think she's going to die. It hits you harder. It hits you harder than it did before.
Because really you feel your feelings.
Yeah, you really feel it.
Yeah.
So
you feel all your parts.
I feel all my parts.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about this, but I wanted to ask you this question, and I go through this sometimes with the groups as well, is I always will say that I had 3 legs to the stool of my healing. And it was, one was Kylene and the great support and grace she gave me, and the boundaries she set, and all of those things, and the terms that said, get your shit together. That was all really, really good for me. The second was groups, being in groups and supportive groups that had fantastic content and a plan. And then the third was therapy. I think, meeting with you on a weekly basis for a year and a half was, I don't think I'd be where I am today if that was not part of my healing path. But as I talk to people and recommend therapy, a lot of times what I'll get is, well, I'm considering it, or I don't know if that would work for me. How do you handle objections to the therapeutic or the coaching route, that you may hear at times?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's so good. First of all, a good number of my clients end up in my office in a space where they're about to lose their marriage, right? Mm-hmm. So that tends to be what gets people through the door, which I totally get. Right? I'm hoping that that's not what stays the motivation throughout. Right? For people who really do deep recovery, that doesn't stay the primary motivation with that. So let me say there are some really good barriers that I do run into, and one is cost. Right? Mm-hmm. So therapy can be pricey. I get that. One way around that in my practice is that I do offer groups, which is they're therapy groups, and they are far less expensive, and I think actually in some ways far more powerful than individual therapy. And there are beautiful ways to do, let's say, paratherapy, if you will, like the program I know you're involved with, Patrick, is really deep and therapeutic. What happens with that program, and I do usually give this caveat, if you do this program, stuff's going to come up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you're probably going to need someone to help process that at a deeper level, because this is not a therapist-run program.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I would just say, like, I wouldn't do it unless you're going to have a therapist, because I mean, that stuff can be overwhelming. Yeah. It was for me when I first started my work. I started in sort of a para-therapeutic environment, and all this stuff came up, and I don't know what I would have done without a therapist. So I usually tell people that this addicted part of you is probably there's a lot under the surface that you don't know about, and it's going to start coming out, and you're going to need some good therapeutic support. So let's figure that out. Right? There are ways to figure this thing out. I'll help you figure it out. I've done some sliding scale with people just to help in that space. But I just want to say, I mean, money is one of those things. I totally get that. There are a lot of people who can't afford therapy, and I do feel for that one thing. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think I get a lot of other excuses because people are usually so scared of losing their family and losing their spouse. They're highly motivated.
You are. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'll just throw my own example in here, because when years ago, it was like back in 2015 or 2016, when we looked for a therapist, and I can't remember how we did it. We looked through our insurance or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I had some negative experiences, and particularly with what I was going through at the time. And so when betrayal happened, I was very resistant for about a month or so, because I was really scared of being in such a traumatic state. And it's very vulnerable. You have to share your story with somebody and you have to trust that person. And they have to know what they're talking about, because if they don't, and if they don't understand what you're going through, or, whatever, it could be a bad experience. And then you've wasted time or money or both.
Yeah.
And I remember years ago before this that I came home after a session and I just collapsed into him crying. I was like, that was not helpful for me at all. It was not helpful. Mm-hmm. And it was scary to me. But then this experience was so much different, and it was so helpful and so healing. And, it was transformative, really. So I love, whenever possible, if you can get personal referrals, or even if doing something like TaraHope Alliance, right? We've really made, if you vibe with us on the podcast, or our personalities, or what we believe in, we've been very, very careful to choose people that we do trust, like you, that are highly qualified. So it is going to be a very safe experience, right? So I would just throw that in there too, that it is, I think there have been situations maybe where people have had bad experiences, and it's scary.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
want to echo that and say some of the horror stories I've heard in this space they're just really bad. And a lot of times they're super abusive toward women. When I hear therapists say, even female therapists saying, well, if you were more this or more that, or be more sexual, I'm blaming a betrayed spouse, horrible stuff. Or for men that I work with, having therapists say, this isn't a problem, this is, all men do this, there are legitimate horror stories out there. And what I want to say, benefit of the doubt, is okay, I've been through a lot of training to not show up that way as a CSAT, and maybe they just haven't. But I still think, how awful is that? How could trauma and addiction walk into your office and you be that blaming and dismissive? So maybe there's part of that too, Kylene. People have those stories, and they tell those stories, and families tell those stories, and
right,
oh, by the way, the church is telling those same narratives, right? And
so true.
Stop, everyone.
Yeah.
I think I used this analogy with somebody, because they had said they'd had a bad therapeutic experience, and it was like, well, you run into people in your life that you jive with, and sometimes you don't, and so don't judge the entire therapeutic profession by one therapist. There are safe therapists out there. You and I jived right away. We connected. We were able to, and you're very safe as well. But I've encouraged folks that hey, if you had a bad experience, reconsider. Get back out there again, because not every person is the same. Not every automobile is the same. Sometimes you drive in a bad automobile, you don't swear off driving for the rest of your life. So it's important to get back out there again, and because it's an avenue to healing.
Well, and I think one of the things to add to what you're saying there is neither sex addiction nor betrayal trauma are in that big, lovely book called the DSM, right? Mm-hmm. And so, unfortunately, a lot of our field is driven by insurance companies telling therapists how they can charge and bill and all this. And so that's a part of it as well, right? So when we have therapists who are, trained in our institutions to think if it ain't in the DSM, it don't exist. I want to say that that's part of the systemic issue that needs to change. Mm-hmm. There needs to be more of me out there. There are 2 CSATs in this Dayton area.
Yeah.
Believe it? 2. Yeah. And it's a much bigger problem.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I hear that all the time when people reach out, across the country, and then they go, I don't have, that in my area, or I don't have this in my area, or there aren't groups, or, this and that. And so we'll actually nicely tie that up with a bow with, that's one of the reasons that we decided to do recovery coaches through TaraHope, is because they can connect virtually and work in that way. And, and you had touched on that financial aspect as well. And that's one of the reasons that, we set up the nonprofit, is so that we can help the betrayed partners that need that empathy, that wisdom, those resources, that guidance from safe people that are highly, highly qualified like you. And so we're so thankful that you are one of the recovery coaches and that you are on the podcast today. And thank you so much just for, again, not to, say it too much, but everything that you've done in our life, we just really do appreciate it. You've made such an impact. And so we're just thankful that you're here and on the episode today. And just thanks for your time.
And thank you both, by the way, for your generosity. You not only are you continuing to recover and heal, but just how generous you are with your time and your resources is super incredible. And I'm very grateful for both of you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this podcast interesting or helpful, it would mean so much if you leave a 5-star review or post a screenshot and share on social media. We are on a mission to share the message of recovery, and you can help get the word out. If you know a friend who could use this podcast, please share it.